Hello and welcome to today's session, Healthcare Security, Protecting Online Data in an Industry Under Attack. My name is Leah Rabinowitz and I will be your moderator today. I'd like to take a moment to introduce today's presenter, John Breyer. John is founder and VP of Business Development for BotRx. He's an industry expert with over a decade in IT security and is dedicated to building a more secure web for all consumers and companies. For your convenience, today's webinar will be recorded and provided to all attendees. And at the end of today's call, we will be accepting questions from the audience. We just have a few more people joining us, so we'll wait for one more minute and then get started.
Thanks, Leah. I'll go ahead and kick it off now. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is John Breyer. As Leah mentioned, I am one of the founders and currently VP of Business Development for BotRx. Today, we'd like to discuss the growing online security problems being seen in the healthcare industry. More and more people rely on online resources to either store their personal medical information or interact with their healthcare providers to either get things like prescriptions, healthcare advice, and in some cases, even doctor's consultations. Unfortunately, this has opened up a Pandora's box of attacks from online fraudsters that is costing the industry in the realm of more than $100 million annually. And in some cases, we're actually seeing companies go out of business because of the attacks from online fraud. So if we look at what we'll discuss today, basically is looking at some of the dark web information that's actually for sale today, and the associated bot attacks that can be performed with this dark web information. We'll also review a healthcare website that BotRx has actually spun up. So we've created what we call a honeypot site, which is not an actual healthcare site, but it looks like a healthcare site. And we actually use that to investigate further the types of attacks that we're going to see on healthcare companies. So we'll go into great detail. Again, this is very recent data from the September-October timeframe. So really up to date and gives a good example of the types of attacks that we normally see on healthcare sites. Then finally, we'll discuss how to actually solve these problems, simple things that you can do on your side to actually help prevent these problems. And then if you need additional information about tools that you can be used, we'll give you some key input into actually what to look for in those scenarios. And then finally, we'll open up for questions and summary. Let's kick right off. So it seems almost every day we get a new notification of another company that's actually either been hacked or breached. This really just shows the relentless behavior of attackers and also the vulnerability of doing business online. Most online breaches are really just the beginning. So when we see these type of credential theft or a company's been breached and their customers' information has been stolen, it's really just the first step in a long history of actual attacks that are going to be performed, not just on those websites, but also on websites like yours. Anyone that has a business online can actually be affected by these other breaches, and we'll discuss how that actually happens. So here's a recent example, a company called AMCA, which was a healthcare processing for payments, basically healthcare payment service for processing payments. So AMCA just recently, I think back in August, September of this year, filed for bankruptcy after a very large data breach. Because they're in the payment processing business, they obviously have a lot of partners like Quest and LabCorp that actually do business directly with them. So right now, I think the total number of breach credentials is up to around 24 million after they look at all the different types of companies that they're linked to. And in this case, unfortunately, this company is going to be going out of business here relatively soon. So the amount of money that they've spent just themselves on this breach is really substantial. So AMCA basically spent about $4 million just on notifications to the individual breach victims. Because this was a HIPAA failure, they do have to follow HIPAA rules for actually notifying of a breach. So that cost them roughly around $4 million, then another $400,000 to $500,000 in just IT people to figure out actually what happened in that breach. And this is pretty indicative of most breaches and the process that most people have to go through. During the discovery phase with the IT folks, they actually found that not only their web payment page was compromised, but also patient information, credit cards, and other transaction data. So this led to an additional $10 to $20 million in additional costs that unfortunately have to be absorbed by the other people who were attacked. But this is just really what actually happens in a breach. Data is compromised, it spawns onto the dark web, and then creates other issues for other people by having compromised credit card information and personal data out there on the web. So if you look at that AMCA breach, which is kind of right here in the middle, you can see roughly about 20 million credentials. Last year alone, starting last year and then early this year, we see upwards of 4 to 5 billion credentials that have actually been breached and published onto the dark web. Forbes estimated that just in the first half of this year, there was 4 billion credentials that have actually leaked onto the dark web from breaches. You can see some of the key ones from last year and early part of this year. So you look at Zynga, which is basically an online gaming company. You have Capital One, MongoDB, which is a database company, First American with 885 million credentials leaked, which is an insurance company. The AMCA example, which we talked about, again, only a small amount of leakage compared to the others, but still that company is now going out of business. And then you've got people like Marriott, which is a very well-known breach. Again, this breach lasted roughly about 2 years before it was even identified. So imagine people like myself who has a Marriott account had our credentials out there in the wild for upwards of 2 years before Marriott even found out about it. So these breaches really have wide-ranging implications to people like myself. I can name 3 companies here that I do business with on a daily basis, and I'm sure that you'll recognize some of these names as well. So it's really critical to understand actually how this leaked data affects individuals and companies. So we'll look at first the credential stuffing piece and actually how that works. So credential stuffing is the simplest example to understand, but it's also usually the first step in other cyber attacks. So you can see here a whole host of the types of cyber attacks that are happening today, but credential stuffing is probably the first one. We also refer to credential stuffing sometimes as password guessing. So if you think about it, it's basically taking all these breach pairs and testing them on every website that's available on the web. So you may think, well, if Marriott's breached, you only have to worry about getting into the Marriott account. And that's actually not true. If you use your Marriott credentials to log into the Marriott site, you most likely will use those exact same credentials on another site. And the reason for this is because most of us have roughly about 250 online accounts. Very difficult for us to remember 250 different username and password combinations. So we unfortunately are lazy, myself included. Until I joined security companies, I didn't really think about it too much, but now I really do. If you reuse those credentials, you're probably going to reuse them on your banking account, other accounts that are out there. And the bad guys know this. So the bad guys say, hey, look, if I can just get one of these breached accounts, I can actually test on my own and see if I can log into other companies. And then I can get access to that person's account and do things like you see on the left, account takeover, account aggregation. You can go in and actually do credit card, look for credit card information, or even place fraudulent credit card transactions, change shipping information. So it really all starts with getting access to someone's account by doing password guessing or credential stuffing. So let's see exactly how that works. Basically, once the credentials are breached and show up on the dark web, bad guys go out there and purchase them. So they maybe purchase a file with, let's say, 100 million username and password combinations. They'll then test them on target websites. So let's just take the banking example. So let's say they test on every banking site in North America. So everything from Bank of America down to the small local credit bureau banks in the US. They'll keep testing them and testing them, maybe no logins capable. And then finally, they'll locate bank accounts where the login actually works. So now the username and password combination they've got for your bank, they can now store those. So let's say out of 100 million accounts, they only get 2% hits. That relates to actually 20,000 known bank accounts that they can get into. So that's a huge number. And they'll offer those for sale to the dark web. So they'll say what we call, I have a known good account for Bank of America or whatever the bank is, and they'll sell those to the next guy in the chain. And really what this looks like is an identity package. So here you can see one from just recent, I think we just downloaded this in November. Again, this is on the dark web. Not many people are familiar with the dark web. Obviously, as a security company, we have researchers that go and look at the dark web and what's available there quite frequently. And you can see here, for $225, you can buy a full identity package for an individual that includes everything from social security number, W-2 information, scans, 1040 tax information. So really very, very detailed information about an individual that will allow them to actually go in, you can think about things that when you get challenged to enter your password, mother's maiden name, all those things are actually stored in these identity files by, unfortunately, the bad guys. Not only is that information, but if you think about getting into your healthcare account, they also have the ability to get information about your family members. So it's not just you, but also members of your family. And in this particular case, there's actually a file out there. Again, this was a recent one that we downloaded in November that is for people's kids. And you would say, well, why is someone's children information viable and saleable in the dark web? And the main reason is if you look at this date of 2010, these children are now coming to age where they're going to be getting their own credit cards, getting their own bank accounts. And what these bad guys do is they camp on this information. And when these people become of reasonable age, and even before they're of an age where they can get their own bank account, they actually start to create accounts for them so they can funnel off their money. So they'll get credit cards in their names, run those credit cards up, and then these kids come out of college, they have a large student loan debt, and then they find out, hey, I also have bad credit and a credit card bill that I didn't pay. And they find out actually those were created by bad guys. So very, very nefarious and also very scary for some families. Here is a specific healthcare example, and this what we can look at is a med ID that's for sale on the dark web. Again, this is directly taken from the dark web last week. So this med ID goes to different healthcare sites. In this case, they were explaining how they can go to California using web IDs, get California drug information, and basically get those information and sent to a drop house. So imagine if you have an account with a med ID, you have drugs that you've purchased through that ID and on an online account, they'll actually redirect those drugs to their house, and they sell a full web tutorial on how to actually get that information and what to do with it. So you can see here, they sell medicine IDs along with social security name, date of birth, state, local zip codes, basically a full kit of information to actually access that healthcare information and steal those drugs and get them drop shipped to a new location. So very, very simple for bad guys. We talk about, most people are used to seeing, oh, the attackers online are these highly sophisticated, highly educated people who know how to hack. Actually, that's not the case anymore. Someone can simply go and buy the tools, they can buy the information, and they can even buy a tutorial on how to actually commit this fraud. So it's a very scary environment and no longer requires any length of skill of any kind to actually access this information. So what we're going to look at next is really a healthcare site that we spun up on the web. And this healthcare site mimics a real site. And what it allows us to do is see what's actually happening when a new healthcare site comes online. What are the typical attacks we see? What kind of things are they after? So this is a real actual site. It's available today. And this data was just taken from roughly about a few weeks ago or a month ago. So it really gives you a good in-depth understanding of where attackers are going, what they're looking for, and what they're doing on these healthcare sites. So we have a tool called Detex, which is a free tool. Again, if you want to get it, if you're using a WordPress site, and we have some other plugins for other sites as well, so just let us know if you need that information. But again, this is a free tool. It just plugs into your website, and it'll actually detect and ID any kind of bots that are hitting your site. So we use a bunch of different techniques to actually gather that information, everything from artificial intelligence to machine learning. But in general, it provides a really good dashboard for you actually to see that traffic, what's happening over time, any specific locations of your site that people are targeting, gives you all that information for free. So it's a great tool. I recommend you go out there and try and get it if you're using WordPress. And if not, contact us and we can actually get you a different plugin that'll work on your site if you're using something like ASP.NET or other areas. So how Detex works is basically we embed some client-side code as well as on the web application side. That data gets sent up to our cloud, and we basically interrogate that data and inspect it and look for bots. And then we'll send you back a report. So we can examine it over any length of time, months, days, weeks, whatever you'd like to see. And what that actual data looks like is this. So this is the actual healthcare site. And what we did in this case was examine it for just the first 2 weeks of its life. And you can see here on the left-hand side, very small amount of humans, which you can imagine would be the case for something like a site like this, because there's no one that knows about it. It's not advertised. It really doesn't represent any specific company. So there's really no reason why a human being would actually go out there. So this traffic actually represents people like myself or my staff that are going out and checking the site, make sure it's working okay. What you can see, however, is a very large number of good bots, what we call good bots, and we'll explain a little bit about what those look like, and then bad bots. So the bad bots are definitely bad automated scripts and bots that have been created to go out and look for information and also attack that specific site. So you can see here in the first week from late August, early September, you can see the first week, really no traffic at all. No humans, no bots, no nothing. Then all of a sudden, we see in the first week, activity starts to ramp up. And then unfortunately, the good bots and bad bots start around the same time. And we'll show you why that happens. So as the week progresses, sometime around the middle of September, we see these huge attacks from bad bots. And this is what we normally call a denial of service attack. So they've tried in around September 7th, September 8th to gain entry to the website. They're unsuccessful. So then on the 13th, they actually hammer it with a lot of other activities. So they'll just try to, what we call brute force, and try to break down the defenses of the website to gain access. And obviously that wasn't successful because really there's nothing behind this website to break down. It's just basically a dummy site. So they can try all day long, they'll never be able to break it down. So if we look at where these bots are going, we can see all the activity is really targeted on the login. So in this particular case, we had a fake login which has a username and a password entry location. And unfortunately, that login was not successfully broken down because really there's nothing behind it. But we can see a huge amount of volume of traffic during that same week. Again, this is the same time frame, almost 7,000 requests coming into the login page. We also see some activity on the home page and then on some of the info pages and a smattering of other pages, but really a majority, almost 100% of the traffic is really targeted at that login page. What's actually hitting, so this is where we actually can tell you the type of bad bots that are actually attacking that site. So you can see here the scripted bots were the number one. We also have this off-res bot, 6.1. This is a known scanner. So this is actually how the attack started. So this scanner went out, scanned the page in that first few weeks of its existence and looked for the login page. And that's actually how the bots knew where to actually focus their attack on this login page, because it had been scanned, categorized, just like most good bots will do as well. They'll go out and scan pages, look for keywords, look for your site and index your site. And unfortunately, in this case, they use the scanner to index for bots. So now the scripted bots, which are just simple scripts that would attempt to log in to that page. Now, the reason we know this is attempting to log in with pairs is because we can actually store those. So on this particular login page, we actually store those known pairs. In the first couple of weeks, they were using things like admin, password, admin1, password1. So very well-known combinations that may come across on most sites as a default login. So they tried all those combinations. When that didn't work, they actually did two things. They ramped up the volume. So they tried to attack with a couple of different scripts. So they retooled. And they also used a known list that they purchased on the dark web of roughly about a couple 100,000 pairs. So they tested those as well. And they also used a different tool called Phantom.js. So we know, it's well known in our industry that Phantom.js is a type of attack tool that's commonly used by attackers. It's free, it's fairly easy to customize, and it's used across the board to actually do credential stuffing. So the indication is clearly that they're trying to actually break down the site, get into the site, and get access to the customer information that sits behind the login page. And you would think maybe after that first few weeks of trying to get in, they actually would go away. That's exactly the opposite of what actually happened. So in this case, now we flash forward to one month later in the mid-October timeframe, and we look at what happens. So in this particular case, we see now the number of views and the number of attacks is going up exponentially. So now we're up to about 25,000 attacks in just one day on the 18th of August. I'm sorry, the 18th of October in this case. So very clearly, we see volume of around 5,000 average hits every day from the bad bots. Good bots are fairly flat, so we don't see a whole lot of activity in comparison on the good bot side. And obviously the humans are pretty much non-existent in this case. But we see these huge spikes, 25,000 on the 18th, and then another spike up to close to 15,000 on the 24th. Again, these denial of service attacks trying to break down. These are all, again, focused on the login page. I don't show it here in this particular slide, but we can definitely tell you they were focused on the login page. And now we see a combination of scripts and Phantom.js used, and quite a few other scanners. So we see the off-res scanner again. We also see the SEMrush, which is also a well-known market type scanner, and the M12 bot, and a few other like AWS and Bach, etc. So predominantly scanners and credential stuffing attacks were really the prime activity on this site, and continues to be today. So I just looked at the data again this week, same general trend of activity, and you would think that they would go away, but realistically bots are fairly easy to train and fairly easy to unloose onto a site. And when you do that, you can just let it go until it tries to actually get, until it actually achieves some goal of getting into that site. And this will probably continue on for the life of the site. And if you have a healthcare site, I can pretty much guarantee you this will also be the activity on your site. I would say there's one word of caution. If you have a WordPress site and you use your URL plus the WordPress login to actually log in and administer your website, that is also under attack. I don't show it here, but we did see quite a large number of attacks on the WordPress login, not just the login that we had on this page. So word of caution, check that if you're running a WordPress site. The bad guys know there's a WordPress login for every WordPress site, and they go after that as well. If they can get access to your main site, they can actually do a lot of really nefarious things, change your site content. They can install bugs, other scripts, other malware onto your site. So really important to protect that WordPress login as well. That points out also really stopping these bots at the reconnaissance phase. So where there's entry points into your site, like the WordPress login that I just mentioned, it's really important to examine your website and know where those gateways are, where bad guys can actually log in and attack your site. So here we changed the name of this particular site, but this is a real site online. Instead of, we replaced their URL with example.com, but this is an active site. The IP addresses have been changed. So if you try to get into these IP addresses, you won't be able to because we took off the last few numbers. But in general, what we can see here is a host of areas where a bot can attempt to do credential stuffing and log into that account. So here we see web conference. You have a web conference login. We have a secure login for employees, most likely. We also have things like desktop logins where they can do remote desktop, mobile logins. So a whole host of gateway entry points into this website that would allow attackers to gain information about the consumers or the employees that are actually using this site. So really important to actually examine those public interfaces, understand where they're at, and help protect them. Most companies are not even aware of the number of URLs that are there and that they even need to be protected. And sometimes things can slip by them. So again, stop it at the reconnaissance phase. It's super important to be active there and understand where you're going to be attacked the most. Again, you can use a simple tool like our detect solution to actually find that information as well. It'll give you more specific information about who's attacking and where they're attacking, but it's very important to block all those interfaces. And really what this tells you is it's really World War B out there. So we kind of stole this from the World War Z, which was the zombie apocalypse movie. But unfortunately, that's exactly what's happening on the web today. There's all types of different attacks being deployed on the internet. If you have a site, I can almost guarantee you, that example of our honeypot site is a really true and actual use case where if you just spin up a site on the web today, it's going to be scanned by both good bots and bad bots. They're going to scan for information that's valuable to them, and they're going to come after you. And they're going to come after you in an automatic form, relentlessly, 24/7. They're going to be hitting your site, as you can see from our honeypot sites. And I guarantee you, if you have valuable content out there as a healthcare provider, that is also going to happen to you as well. The difficult thing that you have is to really identify the difference between good bots and bad bots. So you can see here on the left, we have a smattering of different good bots. So these are things that you probably want to actually hit your site. Things like maybe if you're using Twitter bots. Google has a variety of, like Google Analytics is actually a bot. You have the Google Ads bot. So all these things actually add value to your website. But unfortunately, they are also being used by bad guys to actually attack your site and to break your site down. So it's really important to understand where they're going, what are they doing, and what are they after. So even a good bot can cause disruption to your site. If a good bot is coming in too frequently and hitting your site too frequently. It can actually be using up resources. You definitely don't want good bots that come in too frequently as well. So it's important to be able to understand that and actually control that entry point, because otherwise these good bots can also be compromised by bad actors to actually go in and do things like we talked about earlier, like application DOS, denial of service. Web scraping we didn't discuss here, but that's a big issue for a lot of companies. All their content information is being scraped or taken, everything from price lists to your content that's out there, articles that you publish, even your Twitter users. They'll go in to actually scrape your Twitter users and find out who's using your site, and then it can use that to actually go and petition those Twitter users on their own sites, or even try to actually break down those Twitter users as well, Twitter user accounts. So really important to understand all of those common bot attacks that we see, distinguish between good and bad, and then take action on them and actually stop them from doing any harm on your site. So really what we look at and what we recommend to our customers and to people that are just beginning to do business online or have been doing business online for a long time is to really stop, like we mentioned earlier, at that reconnaissance phase. Prevent the scanning for vulnerabilities. When we talk about vulnerability scanning, it relates to patches maybe that you didn't have time to update on your website, looking at any kind of vulnerability that your site has. Like I mentioned, that WordPress vulnerability, maybe your login page is not well protected. Everyone knows you have those, right? So prevent that scanning first, and that actually cuts out half of the access to bad guys. Next is look at those web crawlers. Anyone that's looking at your account, aggregating your Twitter users, aggregating other information from your site, prevent that from happening as well. So you want to stop those crawlers from constantly accessing data and blocking those crawlers either by IP, by identification, whatever you need to do, stop those crawlers, and actually gives the bad guys no data to actually build their next level of attack. The one we talked about today, which is credential stuffing, is very critical to stop this on any kind of login. So any login you have, any access point on your site, you don't want people to be able to test credentials on your site until they find an opening. That opening could lead to one of your employees, it could lead to one of your customers, and all of those things are very detrimental to your business and really can actually put you out of business, as we showed earlier. And in general, just stop bad bots across the board. So, there's use cases that we haven't even identified that we see happening online. You never know to a bad guy what information is actually viable that they can sell. So any kind of bad bot that's hitting your site, you really need to stop it. It could be scraping. We showed the example of getting children information. This is something I didn't think about until we actually saw it for purchase online. So you really need to actually just stop any kind of bad bots from accessing your site. Otherwise, they could be doing things that you have no idea. It's maybe a new use case that is unknown to other people in the industry. So the main thing is identify them and stop them, and really stop the fraud that's associated with those new use cases. And then finally, whatever tool you use, it really needs to be a low management cost. So you don't want something that takes a lot of time from your IT admin folks or yourself to actually go in and input IP addresses, constantly monitor it, have it dropping information to you through email alerts, etc. That's okay, but in general, most of us get way too many alerts, and sometimes we become immune to those. So you really want something that manages itself and automatically updates signatures, IP addresses, and really becomes not a burden to you, but actually a plus for you and a plus for your security profile on the web. So, make sure it has restricting crawlers and scanners, right? We have a built-in WAF. We know WAF is not 100% effective, but it's an important tool to have in place. So we provide it in our product. But you definitely want to restrict that reconnaissance phase with crawlers and scanners. Then also zero-day prevention. So if you don't have time to patch your product, you want something that helps you and augments your prevention by not allowing those zero-day attacks to work. And then finally, you want to basically stop any kind of automated bots and be able to mitigate them. And when we say mitigate them, it's not actually blocking them. You don't want to block bots, because all that does is give information to the attacker on actually how to access your site. So when we say mitigation, it's throwing up blank pages, sending them to a honeypot site, throwing up different or a variety of different error codes to them that they may not understand. So not giving direct feedback by blocking, but actually mitigating them, sending them somewhere unknown, and actually managing those bots so they don't come back and keep bothering you on a daily basis. So with that, that's all I wanted to talk about today. At this point, we'd like to open it up for questions and answers. So I'm going to turn it back to Leah, our moderator, and let her kind of bring up any questions that we have on the website or on the webinar today. So Leah, please take it over from there. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Looks like we're just getting a question now. Give them one more second. There we go. I'm a team of one and I need to raise awareness on cybersecurity. How would you suggest I communicate to upper management about needing bot mitigation, and what are the benefits to the business?
Great, good question. I think one of the key things that we run across when we talk to some newer customers that are just maybe coming out onto online and have a new website, and also limited budget, right? In the beginning phase of most online businesses, they don't have a large budget for security. So it's very important to actually give visibility to the upper management of actually what's happening on your online business. So a tool like we showed here today, Dtex, again, it's free, and there's other free tools out there as well that actually give you visibility to what's happening on your site. So Google Analytics gives a great idea of what's happening from the marketing standpoint, shows users coming in, et cetera, but it doesn't tell you what adverse things are happening about bots, et cetera. So we highly suggest using something like Dtex to give your upper management information about what bots are hitting your site, what bad activity is on there, as well as the good activity, right? They need to know both sides of that business. And hopefully that helps you to actually give them visibility and get you a bigger budget for the security side of your operation. So I'd say visibility is everything. ID and identify those bots, and hopefully that'll help you to give your upper management a better understanding and also get you a bigger budget.
Great, John. Our next question comes from an attendee that wants to know, right now they're not making any changes to their website, but what are some of the ways that they can tell that bots are attacking their site?
Again, another good question. Obviously, I won't go back through the Dtex thing where we talk about ID, but there's also other things you can do to identify those bots. If you see a large activity, let's say you don't have something like Dtex on your site, you can actually look at large activity even in Google Analytics. So if you say, hey, on one page, I'm seeing only, let's say, a few thousand users, then, but on other pages, you're seeing hundreds of thousands of users. Let's say something like on your login page, you see a much higher incidence of activity. That should be indicative of attacks. So most people, when they start a website, the logical flow is to enter at the home page, and then you would scroll through additional pages later on. What bots normally do is they drop directly onto the page of interest, and they'll do their attacks on that specific page, and they'll ignore the home page or what we call the normal business flow on a web page. So you can pick this up in Google Analytics. If you see, hey, on my login page, I'm getting thousands and thousands of hits, but on my home page, I'm only have a few hundred. That's pretty indicative of an attack. And you can then, once you see that kind of activity, then you can go and install something like Dtex to get a closer view of actually who's coming in. But there definitely are things you can do on your site to really determine that there's heavy bot activity. Next one, Leah.
The next question is around web application firewalls. The attendee says that they have a WAF, but do they need something else?
Definitely, from all the industry data out there today, we clearly know that WAF is only effective half the time. WAF, if you think about it, operates at a layer below the application layer. So when we talk about the application layer, it's the actual user interacting with your website. We call that the application layer, or layer 7. Unfortunately, WAF does not interact at this layer at all. WAF is much lower in what we call the network stack. So WAF is really great at catching things at the network level, like an IP address is what we consider something like a network level indicator. It does a good job of looking at SQL injection, things like that. But it really does a terrible job of the layer 7, or that the user interaction layer. It just doesn't understand that, and it's not really built to stop any kind of activity at that layer. So we highly recommend not only having WAF, but you really need to have something at the application layer that stops bots and identifies bots. Otherwise, you're really setting yourself up for failure. And in most cases, people get a false sense of security. They say, hey, my WAF is in place. I see it stopping attacks. Well, that's just the really basic and cursory attacks, and really is not the full scale attacks like something like we saw in the breach earlier. So definitely WAF is not enough. You need to get something else.
Great, thank you. And for our final question, the attendee does see that they have bots. What can they do about it?
Again, good question. As I mentioned, since WAF is not effective, you need to get a solution that covers those items that I mentioned in my summary. So we have a product called Protex, and it does pretty much all the things that we show here. It's a layer 7 solution. It's installed as a proxy server. So something like Protex, there's other solutions out there on the market today. But the main thing is you want to get something that really does what we show here on the screen, right? Restricts those crawlers and scanners. Again, we have built-in WAF in our product. You want to make sure you have a product that has WAF if you're not already using it. You want to make sure something that helps stop those 0-day protections. So if you forget to update, there's new patches and new 0-day attacks being found every single day for web application servers. And you want something that helps protect you against that, regardless of whether you've updated your patches or not. And then you want that automated bot mitigation. So make sure, again, you get a tool that helps you to automate that process. You don't want to have to do daily intervention. So something like our Protex product, again, you can see it on our website if you're interested. And then there's other ones out there as well. Obviously, we won't advertise for our competitors, but there are other solutions as well if you want to go out and take the time to research. Anything else, Leah, or is that the end of the questions?
John, that is all of the questions we have for today.
Great, thank you. Again, thanks for attending. I hope this was helpful in understanding what we see. If you need to contact us, you can actually contact us. You can contact myself at john@botrx.com or go to our website, botrx.com. Happy to answer any additional questions you may have. Reach out to us by phone, but we are here to help you. We really are passionate about security for websites and would love to talk to you if you're having any kind of issues. So again, thank you very much and look forward to the next one.